for the hardest-hitting show in talk radio. The true progressive voice since 2012. This is Southpaws.
And welcome to Southpaws on the Pacifica Radio Network. We are the leaders of the revolution. I'm Darren Gibson, your host today. We're going to have updates on the Israeli-Hamas war. We'll have the latest with that. A Trump executive has testified in the New York trial. We'll give you the details on that. Speaking of Trump, he is now embracing Argentina's new president, who has dubbed himself an anarcho-capitalist. This guy has been dubbed the Madman. Of course, one madman to another, right? Speaking of madness, we'll talk about Ottawa County and what's happening there. Plus, the Republicans in Wisconsin are trying to push through a $2 billion tax cut, but the governor says, not on my watch. So we'll talk about that and much more in the ensuing hour ahead of us. Before we get to today's topics, a couple of reminders. You can follow us on social media by going to facebook.com/Southpaws Radio Show. You can follow us on X, the former Twitter, at Southpaws Radio. You can follow us on Tumblr at southpawsradioshow.tumblr.com. You can follow us on YouTube and Mastodon by doing a search for Southpaws Radio. You can become a patron of the show by going to patreon.com/Southpaws Radio. You can listen to the show anytime at Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Google Podcasts, Podcast Addict, Podvine, and Pandora by doing a search for Southpaws. Once you found our logo, you found us. We send links to our weekly episodes to our Facebook, X, Tumblr, YouTube, and Mastodon accounts. You can listen to us on Global Community Radio Channel 1 every Saturday night at 11 Eastern. And you can listen to us on great Pacifica stations, including KCEI in Taos, New Mexico, KZGM in Kabul, Missouri, and WMTB St. Petersburg, Florida. So be sure to listen to us on your local Pacifica affiliate. We are recording this show on Wednesday, November 22nd, 2023. It's the day before Thanksgiving. Today is also the 60th anniversary of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. And there have been discussions about the anniversary, and once again, the topic, was there more than one shooter? Well, now the doctors at Parkland Hospital have reunited for a special on the Paramount Plus app. And they're saying that, yeah, there probably was more than one shooter because of the entrance wounds on President Kennedy. So we'll talk about that. That might be a subject for a future episode of Southpaws. We'll have to grab Jack Prince and have him come on after he's watched the Paramount Plus special. Right now, let's get into the Israeli-Hamas war. I guess there's going to be a pause in the fighting, a ceasefire for 4 days. So let's get to the latest from the Associated Press. This is dated November 22nd. A ceasefire agreement between the Hamas militant group and Israel has been confirmed by both parties, along with Washington and Qatar, which helped broker the deal that would bring a temporary halt to the devastating war that is now in its 7th week. The Israeli government said that under an outline of the deal, Hamas is to free over a 4-day period at least 50 of the roughly 240 hostages taken in its October 7th attack on Israel, and Israel is to release some Palestinian prisoners in exchange. Egyptian state media say the truce will begin Thursday morning. Egypt helped mediate the ceasefire agreement, which would bring the first respite to war-weary Palestinians in Gaza, where more than 11,000 people have been killed, according to health authorities. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said before the cabinet voted early Wednesday to back the agreement that the war would continue even if a deal was reached. Some 1,200 people have been killed in Israel, mostly during the initial incursion by Hamas. Here are some of the other events happening involving the Israeli-Gaza war. Out of Geneva, Switzerland, international aid groups that have lined up thousands of aid trucks for Gaza say they're ready to move quickly to send in food, water, and other supplies if a pause in fighting between Hamas and Israel takes hold as hoped on Thursday. Details remain unclear about both the mechanics of getting more aid for beleaguered Palestinians in Gaza and the possible release of hostages kidnapped from Israel whose families have desperately sought their release. The aid groups say a key ambition will be to get help to northern Gaza, which has been largely inaccessible to humanitarian shipments and where nearly all hospitals have stopped working amid a blistering military campaign by Israeli forces. Tommaso Della Longa, a spokesman for the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, referred to the fine print of the announced deal this way, quote, "The entire humanitarian sector is ready to scale up once everything is set," end of quote. Della Longa lamented bottlenecks that have confounded the deliveries of some humanitarian aid, though not nearly enough, into Gaza. He said the IFRC hopes that a deal would include provisions to allow for a faster track of aid shipments. The only route for international humanitarian aid into Gaza since October 7th has been through the Rafah crossing into Egypt, and plane loads of supplies have been flown into the nearby Egyptian city of El Arish, and trucks have queued up near Gaza. Intense Israeli inspections of trucks and cargo have slowed entry into Gaza. Meantime, out of Washington, a major Iranian-backed militant group in Iraq has warned that it may strike additional U.S. targets after U.S. warplanes killed multiple militants in response to the first use of short-range ballistic missiles against U.S. forces at Al-Assad Air Base earlier this week. U.S. fighter jets struck a Kataib Hezbollah operations center and a Kataib Hezbollah command and control node south of Baghdad on Tuesday. That's according to two defense officials speaking on the condition of anonymity to provide additional sensitive details of the attack. There were Kataib Hezbollah personnel at both sites at the time of the strikes, but the officials said they could not yet confirm whether anyone there was killed. Militia officials in Iraq said the attack killed 8 Hezbollah members. They said in a statement Wednesday that it was considering expanding the scope of targets if the U.S. military continues with its strikes, adding that the attack, quote, "will not go unpunished," end of quote. The dangerous back-and-forth strikes have escalated since Iranian-backed militant groups under the umbrella group called the Islamic Resistance in Iraq and Syria began striking U.S. facilities on October 17th, the date that a blast at a hospital in Gaza killed hundreds. The attacks have continued unabated since, with at least 66 rocket and missile attacks hitting U.S. facilities and wounding at least 62 service members. Going back to Geneva, Switzerland's executive branch said Wednesday it will ask Parliament to ban the Palestinian militant group Hamas. The Federal Council said the government will also end contracts it has with 3 Palestinian non-governmental organizations. They were among 11 Palestinian and Israeli NGOs that have been under review by Swiss officials following Hamas's October 7th attacks in Israel. 4 days after the deadly rampage in Israel, the Council moved to designate Hamas as a terrorist group and instructed the Foreign Ministry to consider a possible ban. The 7-member council, which includes the Swiss president, reiterated its condemnation of the attacks in the strongest possible terms and expressed its regret about the tens of thousands of civilians on both sides of the conflict. The United States and the European Union, which does not count Switzerland as a member, have long considered Hamas a terrorist organization. Meanwhile, out of New Delhi, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has called on the international community to provide what's called, quote, "timely and sustained humanitarian assistance," end of quote, to the Palestinians in Gaza. Modi was speaking at a virtual meeting of Group of 20 Nations on Wednesday before India's presidency ends on November 30th. Modi said, quote, "We agree that terrorism is unacceptable to all of us. The death of civilians anywhere is condemnable. We welcome the news today concerning the release of the hostages. We hope that all the hostages will be released soon." End of quote. Israel and Hamas agreed to a 4-day ceasefire in the war in Gaza, a breakthrough that will facilitate the release of dozens of hostages held by militants, as well as Palestinians imprisoned by Israel, and bring a large influx of aid to the besieged territory. Modi said, quote, It is important to provide timely and sustained humanitarian assistance. It is also important to ensure that the war between Israel and Hamas does not take any regional form." End of quote. Out of Cairo, Egypt's state-run Kahira TV said the Israeli-Hamas truce will take effect at 10 a.m. local time Thursday. Egypt helped mediate the 4-day ceasefire. Israeli media also reported that the truce would begin Thursday at 10 a.m. Also out of Cairo, the World Health Organization has documented 178 attacks on healthcare facilities that killed 553 people, including 22 healthcare workers, since the war started on October 7th. That's according to WHO's regional director on Wednesday. Ahmed Al-Mandahari said in an online briefing that about 800 people, including 48 healthcare workers, were injured in the attacks, which damaged 24 hospitals and 32 ambulances. He said that the war has forced the shutdown of 27 out of 36 hospitals and 47 out of 72 primary healthcare clinics across Gaza. He added that the facility is stopping providing services mainly because of a lack of fuel and attacks. He said, quote, "Hospitals must be allowed to replenish the resources they need to continue functioning. We cannot keep providing drops of aid in an ocean of needs," end of quote. Furthermore, from Cairo, the World Health Organization says one of its local staff members in Gaza was killed along with her family when a strike hit the home where they were sheltering. WHO said that 29-year-old Dima Abdulatif Mohammed Al-Haj was killed Tuesday along with her husband, their 6-month-old son, and her 2 brothers. The UN Health Agency said in a statement late Tuesday that over 50 people were reportedly killed in the strike. It was not immediately possible to confirm the report or to determine who carried out the strike. Israel has launched airstrikes across Gaza in the war triggered by Hamas's October 7th attack on southern Israel. Palestinian militants have fired rockets at Israel, some of which have fallen short. Dr. Rick Peppercorn, WHO's representative for the Palestinian territories, said that Al-Haj, quote, "was a wonderful person with a radiant smile, cheerful, positive, respectful. She was a true team player," end of quote. Al-Haj, who had worked as a patient administrator with WHO since 2019, was among hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who fled from northern Gaza to shelter in the south. She had left her home in Gaza City and was staying with relatives. WHO said her death, quote, "is another example of the senseless loss in this conflict," end of quote. And I can tell you what, Israel does not care. They will bomb civilians, and then they will say that Hamas is using civilians as human shields. Really? No, we have past reports from way before this conflict of Israeli soldiers luring Palestinian kids with candy and then shooting them in the head. Sorry, it's there. The evidence is there. I hate to tell you, folks. Out of Vatican City, Pope Francis has met separately with Israeli and Palestinian delegations and begged for peace and an end to what he called terrorism and, quote, "passions that are killing everyone." In encounters arranged before the Israeli-Hamas hostage deal was announced, Francis met Wednesday with relatives of hostages held in Gaza following Hamas's October 7th raid in southern Israel. And he met separately with a delegation of Palestinians with relatives in Gaza. Speaking at the end of his weekly general audience, Francis said he heard from both how much they were suffering and the toll that the war was taking. In the audience were people holding Palestinian flags and scarves, as well as small posters showing apparent bodies in a ditch and the word genocide written underneath. Francis said, quote, "Here we've gone beyond war. This isn't war, this is terrorism. Please let us go forward for peace. Pray for peace. Pray for a lot of peace." End of quote. He also asked for God to help both Israeli and Palestinian people, quote, "resolve problems and not go forward with passions that are killing everyone in the end." End of quote. Francis has spoken out repeatedly for an end to the war. Well, there's only going to be an end to the war when there's an end to religion. Religion, God, is the leading cause of death and has been for thousands of years, and he is the leading cause of death right here in this conflict. Israel says, oh, we were granted that land by God. Really? As a book of fiction written by man 2,000 years ago to control other men and all women. Sorry, book of fiction. Do I need to play Carlin? I guess maybe I should. Here we go.
Well, I mean, life is sacred. Who said so? God? Hey, if you read history, you realize that God is one of the leading causes of death. Has been for thousands of years. Hindus, Muslims, Jews, Christians, all taking turns killing each other because God told them it was a good idea. The sword of God, the blood of the Lamb, vengeance is mine. Millions of dead motherfuckers. Millions of dead motherfuckers, all because they gave the wrong answer to the God question. You believe in God? No. Dead. You believe in God? Yes. You believe in my God? No. Dead. My God has a bigger dick than your God. Thousands of years. Thousands of years, and all the best wars, too. The bloodiest, most brutal wars fought, all based on religious hatred.
Once again, audio from the patron saint of Southpaws, George Carlin. Let us continue here. From Tel Aviv, Israel. Israel's Justice Ministry has published a list of 300 Palestinian detainees and prisoners who could potentially be released in a hostage deal. Most of those on the list published Wednesday are teenagers arrested over the past year for relatively minor offenses, including throwing rocks or alleged incitement. None were convicted of murder, though some served sentences for attempted murder. The youngest detainee on the list is 14. It also includes around 40 women. The detainees are to be released to their homes in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. If they're going back to Gaza, they probably don't have any homes left. They've been bombed to oblivion. According to the Truce for Hostages deal announced Wednesday, 50 hostages will be released over 4 days, likely starting Thursday, during which fighting will pause. After that, every additional 10 hostages released will result in one additional day in the pause and the release of additional Palestinian prisoners. Israel is expected to release 150 Palestinian prisoners in the first 4 days, though the Ministry of Justice published the list of 300 in case the deal is extended. Under Israeli law, the public has 24 hours to object to any release. From Cairo, the evacuation of patients trapped in Shifa Hospital in Gaza City has begun, according to the Palestinian Red Crescent. The charity said 14 ambulances arrived at the hospital on Wednesday, and the evacuation has been coordinated with the United Nations and Doctors Without Borders Medical Group. Ashraf Al-Qidra, the spokesperson for the Gaza Health Ministry, has said there were over 250 patients at the facility, which was besieged by the Israeli military earlier this month. Over 400 displaced people sheltering in the facility have also been trapped there. Israel has accused Hamas of using the hospital, the largest in Gaza, to conduct militant operations. Hamas and health officials have denied the allegation. By the way, those tunnels that were underneath the hospital, confirmation they were dug years ago by Israel. Why? Because there's very little land in the Gaza Strip. So when you need more space, you go down or you go up. You don't spread out because you have no place to spread out. And that was reported by CNN. That was during a CNN interview with somebody that's in Palestine right now, or should say Israel, Gaza. Over the weekend, the World Health Organization coordinated the evacuation of 31 premature babies from Shifa Hospital to southern Gaza. Of them, 28 babies were later transferred to Egypt. Yeah, the other 3 had died. Out of Brussels, Belgium, the European Union's crisis management chief has welcomed the Israeli hostage release agreement and says the halt in fighting that is part of the deal must be used to flood Gaza with desperately needed aid. Crisis Management Commissioner Janez Lenarčič said Wednesday, quote, "We hope that the agreement on a pause of hostilities that has just been released will allow for a substantial surge in humanitarian aid delivery into and within Gaza. We certainly hope that this will not be a one-off," end of quote. He told European lawmakers in Strasbourg, France, that he called for urgent and extended humanitarian pauses throughout Gaza. The 27-nation European Union is the world's biggest aid donor to the Palestinians. Lenarsic said 15 EU aid cargo flights have been sent, with most of that aid already in Gaza, and that more is on the way. The bloc insists that more trucks must be allowed through the Rafah crossing point with Egypt and other corridors opened. Lenarsic said getting into Gaza is extremely challenging and that fewer than 50 trucks a day make it through, a number which he described as woefully inadequate. He welcomed Israel's decision to allow some fuel in, but said it only covers about one-third of Gaza's basic needs. Out of Paris, France's foreign minister says she's hopeful that French nationals will be among the first hostages released as part of a truce deal between Israel and Hamas. The minister, Catherine Colonna, said Wednesday on France Inter Radio, quote, "We hope the French nationals are among them and even if possible among the first group that will be released. We are working for that," end of quote. France counts 8 people missing, some of them confirmed as hostages from the October 7th attack on Israel by Hamas militants that ignited their latest and deadliest war. France also counts 40 killed in the attack. Colonna said that not all the hostages taken on October 7th were captured by Hamas, but she said that in the course of negotiations, the militant group has said that it could assemble together all of the hostages. French President Emmanuel Macron on Wednesday welcomed the truce agreement. In a message on X, the former Twitter, Macron wrote, quote, "We are working tirelessly to ensure that all hostages are released," end of quote. He also hoped the truce will, quote, "enable aid to be brought in," end of quote, and help the Gaza people. Meanwhile, out of Baghdad, the United States military said Wednesday that it has carried out strikes against Iranian-backed groups in Iraq that have launched attacks on U.S. forces. The U.S. Central Command said in a statement Wednesday that its forces had, quote, "conducted discrete precision strikes against 2 facilities in Iraq in direct response to the attacks against U.S. and coalition forces by Iran and Iran-backed groups," end of quote, including one on Tuesday involving the use of close-range ballistic missiles. 2 officials with Iranian-backed militias in Iraq said the strikes hit 3 locations in the area of Jerf al-Sakar, south of Baghdad, killing 8 members of the Kataib Hezbollah militant group. The officials spoke on the condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to speak to the media. In Rome, pro-Palestinian supporters interrupted a town hall meeting with Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson on Tuesday, booing and heckling him when he addressed the Israel-Hamas conflict. The protesters chanted "Shame on you" and accused Kristersson of supporting genocide after he said Sweden condemns Hamas and supports Israel's right to self-defense. Police removed some of them from the venue in Gothenburg, Sweden's second biggest city. Kristersson criticized the protesters in a Facebook post after the event, in which he wrote this, quote, "When we met tonight with a few hundred Gothenburgers, the meeting was disrupted by a screaming and shouting group of people who refused to respect everyone else who had come to ask questions. These political saboteurs appeared to have come to our question and answer session only to shout their anger over Sweden and the EU political position about the conflict in the Middle East. They were particularly disappointed over the condemnation of the terror organization Hamas," end of quote. Kristersson's center-right government has strongly sided with Israel in the Gaza conflict, condemning Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel and supporting Israel's right to self-defense. Pro-Palestinian groups in the left-leaning opposition have accused the government of ignoring the plight of Palestinian civilians. So there's the latest update on the Israeli-Hamas war. So let's get on to our next story here involving the Donald Trump trial in New York. This is Jennifer Peltz writing for the Associated Press, dated November 21st. Tearing up as he testified, Donald Trump's former corporate controller said he gave up on his longtime job because he was worn out by the company's legal woes. Whoa, there we go, folks. Jeffrey McConney was on the witness stand for a 4th day in 6 weeks at Trump's civil fraud trial when defense lawyer Jesus M. Suarez asked why McConney no longer works at the Trump Organization. McConney paused, took off his glasses, raised his hands in the air, wiped his eyes with tissues that were brought to him, and started reflecting aloud about his more than 35 years at the company. He said, quote, "I'm very proud of the work that I did," end of quote. Then he launched into a litany of investigations and legal proceedings in which he's been subpoenaed or called to testify. While his voice trembled, he said, quote, "I just wanted to relax and stop being accused of misrepresenting assets for the company that I loved working for. I'm sorry," end of quote. McConney is among defendants in the trial in which New York Attorney General Letitia James alleges that Trump and executives at his company fraudulently inflated his wealth on his financial statements, which were used to secure loans and insurance. Trump has deplored the case as a political attack by James, a Democrat. He contends the documents actually underestimated his net worth, and he has emphasized that the statements came with notes saying that they weren't audited and that others might reach different conclusions about his financial position. Disclaimers that he characterizes as telling recipients to vet the numbers themselves. Judge Arthur Engeron, who will decide the verdict in the non-jury trial, has already ruled that Trump and other defendants engaged in fraud. The trial is to decide remaining claims of conspiracy, insurance fraud, and falsifying business records. James wants the judge to impose over $300 million in penalties and to ban Trump from doing business in New York. And that's on top of Engeron's pretrial order that a receiver take control of some of Trump's properties. An appeals court has frozen that order for now. Former Controller McConney worked at the Trump Organization from 1987 until this past February. He has testified that he retired and he is receiving a total of $500,000 in severance payments. His exit came months after he was granted immunity to testify for the prosecution at the Trump Organization's New York criminal tax fraud trial, where he admitted breaking the law to help fellow executives avoid taxes on company-paid perks. The company was convicted and is appealing. At the current civil trial, McConney was called to testify last month by the Attorney General's office and again this week by defense lawyers. During his various stints on the stand, he has testified about how he and other executives arrived at the asset values that James's office says were wildly high, but that he says were legitimate. He disclosed, for example, that the estimate for the boss's Trump Tower penthouse was increased by $20 million, partly because of the value of Trump's celebrity. Meanwhile, the triplex also was valued for years at 3 times its actual size, a discrepancy that McConney attributed to information from a colleague he believed, quote, "knew the property a lot better than I did," end of quote. McConney said he valued Trump's Mar-a-Lago club in Florida as though the property could be sold as a private home, though an agreement with the National Trust for Historic Preservation called for keeping the property a club, a status that yielded tax benefits for Trump. In his own testimony earlier this month, Trump told the court that he believes he retains the right to redesignate the property as a home. The trust has declined to comment. The Trump Organization only sometimes hewed to appraisals when putting down property values on Trump's financial statements, McConney testified. He said that, quote, "just because there's an appraisal done doesn't mean it properly reflects the value of that property," end of quote. He said that it was his understanding that Trump himself reviewed the financial statements before they were finalized. Trump testified earlier that, quote, "I would see them and I would maybe on occasion have some suggestions," end of quote. McConney testified that there is no right way to determine a property's worth. He said the basis for his evaluations were clear to the outside accountants who prepared the financial statements, though one of those accountants, Donald Bender, testified last month that the Trump Organization didn't always supply all the information needed. McConney, who worked closely with Bender for decades, insisted the accountant was so well informed about the Trump Organization's operations that, quote, "he knew more about the company than I did," end of quote. McConney testified Tuesday that he never intended to mislead anyone or to be inaccurate. He said, quote, "I think everything was justified. Numbers don't represent fully what these assets are worth," end of quote. He added that he and others at the company felt comfortable with the valuations. While throwing his hands up, he said, quote, "to be hit over the head every time with a negative comment over something is just really frustrating, and I gave up," end of quote. Yeah, now he's going to give up Trump. This is going to be great. I'm going to love it. Well, it looks like Donald Trump might have somebody new to send Christmas cards to this year. We have this story. This is Nicholas Riccardi and Jill Colvin writing for the Associated Press. This is dated November 21st out of New York City. Donald Trump has long praised a particular type of foreign leader, men he describes as tough and strong, even if they have chipped away at their country's democratic norms. Yeah, because Donald Trump is not tough and strong, or he doesn't see himself as tough and strong. Therefore, he has to project. And that's all he does is project. Project and gaslight, just like all Republicans do. Sorry, folks, I'm telling the truth. Trump is now celebrating the newly elected leader of Argentina, Javier Milei, a wild-haired, chainsaw-wielding, self-described anarcho-capitalist dubbed the Madman by his admirers. In a video posted Tuesday on a social media site that echoed an earlier statement, Trump exulted, quote, "A very special congratulations to Javier Milei on a great race for president of Argentina. I am very proud of you. You will turn your country around and truly make Argentina great again." End of quote. Really? Yeah. Milei's resounding win gives Trump a new potential ally if he wins the White House again, and underscores his enduring influence on global politics in the near decade since he launched his first bid for the presidency. It's also the latest example of the potency of right-wing populism that flirts with authoritarianism and an anti-incumbency fever that has spread across much of the world. Stephen Levitsky, a Harvard University political science and co-author of How Democracies Die, said, quote, "It's just so much easier to be a populist than it used to be," end of quote. Levitsky cited several global trends that have reshaped both Argentine and U.S. politics. Among them, the repeat economic shocks the world has suffered since 2008, the fallout from the coronavirus pandemic, and the reach of social media. Rising populism and anger at the perceived establishment could shape not just next year's U.S. presidential election, but votes across the world. The United Kingdom, Mexico, India, Pakistan, and Taiwan are all expected to vote on new leaders in 2024. Levitsky said, quote, "Voters want figures from recognizably outside the political establishment who basically want to punch the establishment," end of quote. Milei often stoked comparisons to Trump during his campaign, praising him in an interview with former Fox propaganda channel host Tucker Carlson, and promoting unproven theories about election fraud in his own race before he won. Many of Milei's supporters made Make Argentina Great Again hats and T-shirts a common sight during the campaign, echoing Trump's slogan. He spoke of taking a chainsaw to government and abolishing Argentina's central bank and key ministries, including those of health and education, just as Trump has proposed slashing government agencies criticized by some conservatives. His call to purge the political caste from Argentina's government followed Trump's calls to drain the swamp and obliterate a deep state he claims is against him in Washington. Yeah. Bullshit! Milei won all but 3 of Argentina's 24 provinces, and his opponent conceded even before the Electoral Authority began announcing the preliminary results. But prior to winning the runoff election, he promoted unproven claims of irregularities in the election's first round, suggesting, quote, that they put the result in doubt, end of quote. He also vowed in a radio interview Monday to privatize state-run media outlets that covered him negatively, in which he deemed, quote, a covert ministry of propaganda, end of quote. Trump continues to promote lies about the election he lost to President Joe Biden and has attacked media outlets he deems unfriendly as, quote, enemies of the people, end of quote. No, the only enemy of the people is you, Donald John Trump, you orange pig. Jimena Sanchez Garzoli, the director for the Andes at the Washington Office on Latin America, a human rights organization, said, quote, there is definitely a feeding off each other, end of quote. She said both men are products of the same economic and social forces. Sanchez Garzoli, who went to Argentina to observe the elections, described broad discontent with the political order across the region as liberal democracies fail to meet the basic needs of their populations. That is driving a sense of disillusionment and mass polarization, she said, especially among younger generations who have responded by saying, quote, let's burn it down and go with something completely different. They feel that this person is different, so somehow it has to be different, end of quote. Beyond sharing policy goals, she said, Trump and Milei are also stylistically similar, both seen as celebrities who project a sense of machismo and thrive on, quote, being as outlandish as possible to keep ratings going, end of quote. She added, quote, what Trump did was he broke the rules of how you talk about things. I think he made it okay to go after your opponents in a very no-holds-barred, no-respect, exterminate them at any point way, end of quote. Which she said wasn't the kind of rhetoric, quote, you saw to this level in Latin America before, end of quote. It's unclear if Trump and Milei might forge a friendship as Trump did with another South American leader, Brazil's former president Jair Bolsonaro, who was once labeled the Trump of the tropics. Bolsonaro, who made visits to the U.S. as president and spent time at Trump's Mar-a-Lago club in Florida, also ran an unabashedly pro-Trump campaign and emulated Trump's tone and style. He, too, made unsupported allegations of fraud after his loss last year, which culminated in an attack on the Brazilian capital eerily reminiscent of the January 6, 2021 traitorous assault in the United States. I added the word traitorous because those people were and still are traitors. But while Trump is now the frontrunner for the Republican nomination, Bolsonaro was barred from running for any political office until 2030 for abusing his power. Beautiful. That's what we need to do here in this country, is we need to ban Trump from running ever again. Use the 14th Amendment against his orange ass. Trump's campaign did not respond to questions about whether he and Milei had spoken since Milei's victory or whether they intend to. But Trump has long had an affinity and respect for authoritarian leaders and populist strongmen, explaining at times that, quote, the tougher and meaner they are, the better I get along with them, end of quote. Among the leaders he's praised are Hungary's Viktor Orban, China's Xi Jinping, Russia's Vladimir Putin, and North Korea's Kim Jong-un. He has been particularly enamored of late by Orban after an interview in which the Hungarian leader blasted the Biden administration and said the only path to ending the war in Ukraine would be Trump's re-election to the White House. Speaking Saturday at an event in Fort Dodge, Iowa, Trump spent several minutes praising Orban, saying he was very honored by the comments from a man he called one of the strongest leaders, end of quote. Of the country, which European Union lawmakers last year declared was no longer a democracy and has instead become a hybrid regime of electoral autocracy under the leadership of its nationalist government, Trump said, quote, he is a very strong man, very strong, powerful man, and one of the most respected leaders in the world. Tough. No games, right, Hungary? End of quote. Trump also continued to praise Xi, describing him as, quote, a man who looks like a piece of granite, right? He's strong like granite. He's strong, end of quote. Trump went on with his verbal diarrhea by saying, quote, he is a fierce person. Now, the press doesn't like it when I say good things about him, but what can I say? He runs 1.4 billion people with an iron hand, end of quote. He has used similar language to describe Putin, drawing criticism from his rivals in the GOP primary. Trump has long defended his use of such language, insisting his comments are statements of fact, not flattery. He said, quote, if I say a certain leader is smart that's controlling a big part of the world, the press gets upset that I say smart because that's a good thing. No. These are very smart people, end of quote. No, these are very dangerous people, and Trump is one of them. Oh, my God. People, you need to figure this out now. Regardless of whatever criticisms you have of Biden, he's not Trump. Period. End of story. Unbelievable. All right, let's get to some local politics, but this time we're not going straight to Michigan. We're going first to Wisconsin. This is Scott Bauer writing for the Associated Press out of Madison, Wisconsin. Governor Tony Evers on Monday vetoed a $2 billion Republican tax cut bill, calling it, quote, completely unserious, end of quote. Evers' veto was expected as he opposed the GOP plan from the moment it was introduced as a substitute to the Democratic governor's own workforce development package. Evers has previously vetoed a similar income tax cut passed by the legislature. Republicans don't have enough votes to override the veto unless they get help from Democrats, which they're not going to get at this point. Lawmakers are not scheduled to return in session until mid-January. Republicans gutted a $1 billion Evers proposal to invest in child care he called on the legislature to pass in a special session in September. Instead, the legislature passed a measure that would have cut income taxes, created a child care tax credit, and increased income tax deductions for private school tuition. The vetoed bill also had provisions to recognize some out-of-state professional credentials in Wisconsin and to prohibit state examining boards from requiring counselors, therapists, and pharmacists to pass tests on state law and regulations. In his veto message, Evers said the Republican bill failed to, quote, meaningfully and sensibly address the workforce challenges that have plagued Wisconsin for a decade. It is clear today Republicans remain disinterested in passing real solutions to the most pressing challenges facing our state, end of quote. Republican Senate Majority Leader Devin LeMahieu said the bill that Evers vetoed, quote, would have provided meaningful relief for Wisconsin families to address inflation and rising child care costs, end of quote. By tax deducting private tuition? Are you kidding me? The Evers proposal rejected by the legislature would have spent $365 million on child care, $65 million on University of Wisconsin funding, $200 million on a new engineering building at UW-Madison, and $243 million toward a 12-week family medical leave program for Wisconsin workers. Now that's a plan I can get behind right there. Republicans who control the legislature remain in talks with university leaders about funding the engineering building. Earlier this month, more than 40 business leaders from across Wisconsin sent lawmakers a letter urging them to support the project, saying a new engineering building would allow the university to serve more students and employers. The Wisconsin Alumni Association is also funding an advertising campaign about the need for more engineers in the state. Republican Assembly Speaker Robin Vos last week said, quote, we would love to be able to find a way to get to yes, end of quote, to approve the engineering funding building. But he said UW must control the number of positions it has added in recent years and addresses concerns about diversity, equity, and inclusion programming. Oh, here we go again. We got the Republicans wanting to get rid of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Oh, let's not include people of color. You know why? Because Republicans are racist at their core. They really are. They're racist at their core being. You can quote me on that. Voss has argued that DEI programs are a waste of public funding and that the university should be focused on other priorities. Oh, really? Yeah, that's the remix. Yeah. Voss has blocked pay raises for UW employees over his objection to the university's DEI efforts. Evers has filed a lawsuit arguing that the legislature is unconstitutionally stopping the pay raises, which they probably are, if the truth is known. So we'll stay on top of what's happening in Wisconsin. In the meantime, let's get to local politics. Let's go back to lovely Ottawa County, Michigan. This is Sarah Leach writing for the Holland Sentinel. This is dated November 21st. What was at first glance meant to be a straightforward meeting of the Ottawa County Board of Commissioners descended into fiery exchanges about the fate of Ottawa food on Tuesday. District 4 Commissioner Jacob Bonema requested a resolution be added to the next full board agenda to, quote, fund a health educator to serve specifically as Ottawa food coordinator for fiscal year 24 at a cost of $121,274, end of quote. In a November 17th email to his fellow commissioners and Administrator John Whale Feces Gibbs, Bonema wrote, quote, I acknowledge trust is currently at a low point between our health department and the BOC. I am requesting that we all set that aside for this issue. Let's come together to serve our neighbors and OCDPH with grace and mercy as we head into the holidays. There is a tremendous need being placed on these nonprofits and ministries right now." End of quote. Despite the request, the measure wasn't added as a resolution, but rather as a discussion item under the administrator report. Now, guess who wasn't present at the meeting to give that report? Whale feces. Because he's probably out stuffing his fat face. Oh, I hate John Gibbs. I hate that man with a passion. The ask came after Ottawa Food, a collaboration of more than 40 local agencies, announced its membership voted to suspend the current operating model on November 13th because the budget for fiscal year 2024, which began October 1st, was only $8,950, which covers only materials and supplies and doesn't fund the coordinator the program needs in order to provide logistical support to get food where it needs to go. The organization said it wasn't disbanding, but admitted without a coordinator in place, certain programs would need to be cut, such as Senior Project Fresh, which distributes farm market coupons to local seniors through federal funding. Another impacted program affects produce donations from local farmers markets, specifically in Hudsonville, Spring Lake, and Georgetown, which just started this year, coordinated and launched by Ottawa Food Coordinator Sierra Schutz. The statement said, quote, "As of now, the collaborative still exists, but all regular monthly and quarterly meetings and other activities are on pause," end of quote. They added that the organization's board, quote, "continues to meet and discuss the best course of action for the continued success and viability of the collaborative and its initiatives and programs," end of quote. The discussion Tuesday revisited controversial cuts made to the health department's health education budget, which the board reduced by 48%. Despite numerous warnings by Health Officer Adeline Hambley and her staff, whale feces and board chair Joe Moss insisted enough funding was in the budget to fund Ottawa Food. During the board's September 26 meeting, Moss asked, quote, "Does anyone want to go on record as against Ottawa Food? The board is not defunding Ottawa Food. I'll just say on the record, I would not like the health department to cut this program. I don't think anyone does. I would venture that no one in the room would want this cut," end of quote. Tuesday's discussion began as newly hired Deputy Administrator Benjamin Wetmore distributed an information packet to the commissioners that wasn't included in the board's publicly available packet. A partial copy of the packet was provided to the Holland Sentinel after the meeting. Inside, Wetmore says, quote, "The claim that Ottawa Food only received $8,950 in county funding is false. Ottawa Food was provided 3 staff and significant county funding that has been provided to its coalition partners," end of quote. I don't believe Wetmore. I don't believe whale feces. They are liars. Republican liars. That's all they're good at is lying. Moss, who did not immediately disclose what was in the supplemental packet, questioned Health Planning and Promotion Manager Lisa Ugansky about the 3 positions after Bonema asked her if Wetmore had ever met her or any of the public health department staff. She said that he had not. Ugansky repeatedly clarified the health department did not make the decision to suspend Ottawa Food's programming, but that the coordinator position, quote, "was essentially eliminated without this funding," end of quote. Despite several meetings throughout September that specifically highlighted the potential consequences of the funding cuts, Moss asked Ugansky, quote, "Do you know why Ottawa Food decided to suspend these programs? Why not take the time to look for funding?" End of quote. She replied, quote, "Our budget was cut by 48%. The food coordinator worked year-round," end of quote. Moss, who also founded the far-right fundamentalist group Ottawa Impact that currently holds the 6-seat majority on the 11-member board, then asked Ugansky repeatedly why she didn't, quote, "come back to finance," end of quote, when she realized Ottawa Food operations would be suspended. He said at several moments that she was directed by the board to come back if additional funding was needed for any programs. Ugansky said that did in fact happen when Hambley sent emails to whale feces in late October and early November asking to announce the impending closure of the health department's Hudsonville office due to budget cuts. Uganski told Moss, quote, Hambly has been in communication with whale feces for many of these issues, including the closing of the Hudsonville location, end of quote. Moss replied, quote, you're changing the question, end of quote. She responded, quote, I don't think I did. Our health officer has been communicating this, and we were told to wait, and there was a way to make it work out, end of quote. Yeah, I believe her before I believe any of those other Republicans, because they're a bunch of goddamn bullshit artists. That's all they're good for, is spreading bullshit. In an October 27th email, Hambly wrote to Whale Feces, quote, as I have been explaining for over a month, this closure of the Hudsonville office is not because it was determined that services were not needed at the site, but it is a sacrificial compromise to reallocate funds to support Ottawa food programming and other health, education, and nutrition services in the community due to significant budget cuts to those programs in that combined line item, end of quote. Whale Feces responded the same day, quote, Addie, we will have the finances needed to support the right level of operations, especially since we're dealing with a relatively small number here. The specific manner in which we'll provide the funding will not be able to be decided prior to Monday, so I ask you to hold off on any public release until we can consult further, end of quote. On November 2nd, Hambly emailed Whale Feces and several members in the county's finance department saying, quote, unless the general fund has been increased to provide the additional $60,000 that closure of this office provides to operations, then this release has to go out today as the Hudsonville office is closing tomorrow. Patients have been rescheduled in anticipation of this closure. End of quote. Whale Feces responded, quote, the press release should not go out as we'll have a solution. I'll connect with you today, perhaps after negotiations, to get some additional information, and then we can go from there. End of quote. Bullshit! What a liar. Goddamn lying sack of shit. Hambly also provided funding information specifically about Ottawa Food to Whale Feces and at least two commissioners, Bonema and District 3's Doug Zylstra, on November 17th. Hambly emailed Whale Feces on November 20th regarding Bonema's request, saying she nor her staff were asked to provide any information nor asked to attend for the discussion. Hambly wrote, quote, as you and I haven't had a meeting since August 4th, I find it difficult to believe that you have a complete picture of how the 48% budget cut to the health, education, and nutrition line item impacted programming. I have repeatedly stated throughout the budgeting process that a cut of nearly 50% to the health education line would result in changes to programs and services. Your continued statements that programs could remain unchanged after such significant underfunding is simply inaccurate. In one meeting, you stated that replacement funding could be found by eliminating condom cupcakes and eliminating the tips program, or what you referred to as teaching bartenders to not serve drunk people. As I have said repeatedly, OCDPH did not use resources to purchase condom cupcakes, and TIPS is a program that works with businesses to reduce alcohol-related death and injury, such as drunk driving, and is paid for through grants. End of quote. Hambly also said she has received no communication from Whale Feces on, quote, where we stand on funding for the Hudsonville location, end of quote, referencing the department's plans to remove and reassign staff at the location after the health department's budget was reduced by more than $4 million this year. Oh, wow. Whale Feces has finally released a statement to the Holland Sentinel after the Ottawa Food announcement saying this, quote, the Ottawa County Department of Public Health is fully capable of funding its portion of the Ottawa Food Collaborative and continuing to provide a dedicated county staff member to the effort. End of quote. He continues in the statement, quote, it is instead sadly choosing to engage in theatrics by attempting to needlessly cut high-profile programs in order to exchange political points, behavior which is a disservice to Ottawa County taxpayers and to all of the hardworking staff in the Ottawa County Department of Public Health. End of quote. Yeah, like you care about anybody in the Ottawa County Department of Public Health, as noticed by your behavior this year. you liar. Moss asked Uganski why other funding sources were not identified, pointing to funding the county sends to nonprofit partners like Community Action House and the Michigan State University Extension Office. Uganski explained several times those sources weren't able to cover the food coordinator position. Vice Chair Sylvia Rodea criticized another county nonprofit, Community Spoke, for, quote, being absent this year and going to the press instead of the Finance Committee meeting, end of quote. Rodea added on Tuesday, quote, it's very reminiscent of the budget process. I'm feeling uncomfortable maintaining a system that is not interested in coming back to the board for assistance and going to the media for political moments, end of quote. Oh, f*** you, Sylvia. Hambly's attorney told the Holland Sentinel after the meeting that Moss's comments were, quote, a clear attempt to manufacture new charges against my client, end of quote. Sarah Riley Howard of Grand Rapids-based Pinsky Smith said, quote, everyone knows that's what it is, and we'll take appropriate legal action depending on what happens, end of quote. Hambly has been locked in litigation with the county since February after she alleged that they tried to improperly fire her and then repeatedly attempted to interfere with her state's issued responsibilities. The two sides head back to court Monday, November 27th, when a circuit court will consider whether a vote taken on November 6th by the board to accept counsel's recommendation on settlement does in fact mean a $4 million settlement agreement was reached. Hambly says there was, Moss said there wasn't. Howard said Wetmore, quote, did not attempt to contact anyone at the health department as far as we're aware, end of quote, for the information he provided to the board on Tuesday, quote, and there are multiple falsehoods in what was stated, end of quote. Howard added, quote, there were many times Administrator Whale Feces promised to address the funding issues with the board, end of quote. She said many of Moss's comments during the meeting focused on process and procedure. Howard added, quote, they have to go to the administrator, which is what happened. Whale Feces said he would address it, and then they're accused of not asking for the money. I mean, when they made the original budget request, that was request number 1 for the money. I mean, literally, are they looking for a singing telegram? They've been told what the situation is. They have been provided documentation. They have said they don't want state intervention, which means the health education programs need to continue to be funded. There is absolutely no other solution to this problem. End of quote. Howard said the manner in which Uganski was questioned at the meeting sends an obvious message to county employees that speaking up will result in negative consequences. Howard added, quote, I think it's worth mentioning how inappropriate it is not to take her up on her offer to come and address this and then abuse an employee in this fashion. Everybody's intimidated and worried about if you speak up what happens, because they've seen what happened to Health Officer Hambly. And of course, that is very chilling to every other employee, probably for the entire county. End of quote. She also criticized Moss and Rodea for insinuating the county's nonprofit partners should find other ways of funding the food coordinator position. She said, quote, I personally really think it's damaging for the county to be accusing nonprofits to do food security work of having the money to pay for a coordinator, which is how I read some of their comments. I think it's disgusting and horrifying to somehow point the finger at nonprofits that work on food security. I think the commission should be ashamed of itself. End of quote. She's right. She is absolutely right. Commissioners in Ottawa County don't care about hungry people. They only care about their wealthy friends. That's it for this week. I'm Darren Gibson. Please support independent media, the First Amendment, and a woman's right to choose.
The stations that carry Southpaws do not necessarily share the opinions expressed on the show. Southpaws is protected by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and is copyrighted by Big D Entertainment. All rights reserved.